to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. There is hurting in my family, and there is sorrow in my town. There is panic all across the nation, and there is wailing the whole world round. But I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. May the children see more clearly, and may the elders be more wise. May the winds of change caress us, even though they burn our eyes. But I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. Hi everyone, good evening. So glad to be here with you. My name is Pax. My pronouns are they and she, and I wanted to lead you in song, starting with a song by Pastor Katie Akins, who I work with at Tabernacle United Church. Tonight we'll be singing some songs about nature, about refuge, about reconnecting to the incredible planet that we live on. And this song speaks to that from the perspective of the Creator, inviting us to come to the river, bathe in the waters of grace, and then to remember the purpose we have, flying on the wings of our ancestors' songs. We belong here on earth. And I think saying you belong is very similar to saying find refuge here, you belong. So please sing the song with me as you learn it, as you hear it, and you'll find the lyrics document in the chat. Let's sing together. Come to my river, bathe in waters of grace. Don't hold on to your shame or your past mistakes. Healing water, move in freedom, wash in my grace. Come to the wild meadows of my design. Find your place in creation. Watch the birds in the sky. Touch the leaves, feel the breeze. Here you belong. Take courage, step in. Remember the purpose I have placed on you. Fly on the wings of your ancestors' songs. You belong. You belong. that grow down, holding tree next to seed, holding in, holding on, here you belong. Take courage, step in, I have carried you through. Remember the purpose I have placed on you. Fly on the wings of your ancestors' songs. You belong. You belong. Take courage, step in, I have carried you through. Remember the purpose I have placed on you. Fly on the wings of your ancestors' songs. You belong. You belong.
Thank you, Pax, and welcome, friends. You have arrived at Refugia Faith, an evening of conversation and music centered around Debra Rienstra's book that invites people of faith to be people of refugia, a concept that our team at the BTS Center has been incredibly inspired by recently. The BTS Center is the organizational successor to Bangor Theological Seminary and is focused on spiritual leadership for a climate-changed world. Tonight's event launches a season of Refugia programming for us, which you'll hear more about later in the program. I want to extend a special welcome to those of you who found your way to this event through our partner organizations, Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, Creation Justice Ministries, the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ, and the Episcopal Diocese of Maine Climate Justice Council. Welcome, we're glad you're here. My name is Nicole Dieroff. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as program director at the BTS Center. I'm logging in this evening from Scarborough, Maine, from lands long stewarded by the Wabanaki, the people of the dawn. I am joined this evening by our executive director, Alan Ewing Merrill, and our director of applied research, Ben Yashua Davis, both of whom you'll be hearing from shortly. Also, I want to give a shout out to Kay Ahmed, Madeline Bagot-Hart, and Ash Temin, members of our team who are managing tech behind the scenes and serving as chat chaplains. And finally, huge gratitude to our event musician, Pax Wrestler, who will be providing the soundtrack for our evening together. There will be moments throughout the program where we invite your participation via the chat, and we invite you to engage as you feel comfortable. Other than those moments, you are welcome to share insights, connections, and resources in the chat, and Ash will be attending to your comments there. If the chat is distracting to you, however, please just keep it closed. Do whatever helps you to listen, learn, and reflect tonight. And now I'd like to invite you to open up that chat box and say hello to those who have gathered here this evening. First, please share where you are logging in from. I'm seeing locations in Maine, Indiana, Seattle, Boston, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Missouri, New York, Philadelphia, Colorado, and so much more. We're thrilled to have so many of you here with us tonight. Second, I invite you to share an instance of weather weirding you've experienced in your location. I invite you to put that in the chat now, an instance of weather weirding in your location. Crocuses on January 20, 60 degrees today. This is going to be a popular one. I didn't even need to wear a coat, and I'm in Maine and it's February. Torrential rains, extreme temperatures, 106 degrees in the summer, roads flooded, more flooding, bunnies that are out right now. Thank you. Last but not least, I invite you to share a climate-related emotion you've been experiencing recently. Climate-related emotion you've been experiencing recently. Anxiety, grief, fear, despair, anger, sadness, hope, joy, frustration. It is in this context that we gather, friends, and it is why we gather, because we are not alone. Thank you to each and every one of you for choosing to be in this Zoom space tonight, talking about this topic with this group of people. We'll be moving through several rounds of conversation with music and opportunities for engagement in between. And now I'm pleased to turn things over to the BTS Center Executive Director, Alan Ewing Merrill.
Thank you, Nicole, and good evening, friends. It is such a joy to see all of you here in this Zoom room this evening. We're so glad to have you with us tonight. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Alan Ewing Merrill. My pronouns are he and him, and I serve as the Executive Director of the BTS Center. It's my great pleasure to introduce our guest this evening. Debra Rienstra is Professor of English at Calvin University, where she has taught since 1996, specializing in early British literature and creative writing. Dr. Rienstra is an essayist and a poet, and she's authored 4 books exploring motherhood, spirituality, and worship. And of course, the particular book that we're here this evening to explore, Refugia Faith, Seeking Hidden Shelters, Ordinary Wonders, and the Healing of the Earth, which weaves together personal narrative, eco-theology, spirituality, and nature writing beautifully and with profound insight. I suspect some of you have encountered that book and are here tonight because you're looking forward to hearing Debra talk with us about it. She also writes bi-weekly for the Reformed Journal blog, where she explores spirituality, pop culture, the church, the arts, and higher education. And she hosts a fantastic podcast called, you guessed it, Refugia. Debra, we are so glad to welcome you this evening.
Oh, Alan, thank you. I am so honored to be here and so delighted to have gotten to know you folks a little bit. Alan, Nicole, thank you so much. William, Ben, Jenna, thank you for being here. And I'm so pleased to get to know the BTS and to be able to engage with your audience a little bit. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm really just thrilled to be here.
You are so welcome. So let's just jump right into the conversation. First of all, I want to say thank you for writing this book. You have a way of getting right to the heart of what is most true with honesty and insight, and not only that, but with really beautiful prose. So the fact that you are a professor of English really comes through in this book. So we who are connected with the BTS Center have just been incredibly inspired by your work, and it's truly an honor and a delight to be able to share this evening with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
So for those of you, for those who are with us tonight who may be kind of new to your work, tell us a little bit about this concept of refugia. What was it about this scientific concept that so captured your heart and your mind, and how does it translate spiritually and theologically into a vision for what people of faith are called to do and who we are called to be in this moment of global climate devastation? What does it mean to be people of refugia?
Oh, thank you. Well, it took me 250 pages or so to kind of trot that out. So, but I came across the idea at a time when I had been reading a lot about the climate crisis. So I had been sort of gathering, as I think our listeners, our audience members tonight have also been feeling this kind of impending sense of doom the more I learned about the climate crisis. And I was reading a book by Kathleen Dean Moore called Great Tide Rising. Beautiful book, highly recommend it. And in 4 pages in the middle of that book, she describes the idea of refugia. I'd never heard of it before. It's a familiar biological concept. And her example was the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980, and how after that eruption, there was this layer of horrible ash everywhere, and people thought there's no way this mountain is going to green up in decades, generations. And lo and behold, it did. And even today, 43 years later, it's actually greened up quite a lot. And the reason is that even under that death ash, there were these little hidden shelters. And it turns out those are called refugia. And so when I read that in that book, I think it was just one of these things where a concept hits you at the right moment. And somehow I thought, well, aren't we also living in this time of enormous crisis? What we need are sheltering places. This is how nature is resilient. This is how nature copes with crisis, these refugia spaces. And it just struck me that that would be a marvelous metaphor for a kind of survival mode as we face more and more, not just the climate crisis, but all the other crises that are kind of creating this convergence and this feeling that we're at a sort of inflection point. So I thought about it more and thought about the scriptural witness. And it occurred to me that in the Bible too, God seems to really like refugia. So God seems to work in the Hebrew scriptures as well as in the New Testament through small hidden things that become enormously important. So in my thinking about the church these days, for me, as a Christian, I think about the church. I know this is in some ways true of people of other faiths as well. There's just a lot of frustration over what's happening in the church, especially with regard to the climate crisis. And I think underlying some of that frustration is the sense that we just don't have the right metaphors for who we are or what we do. So it struck me immediately that being the people of refugia was a useful metaphor that resonated with the scriptural stories and that answered this moment of crisis. We are to be the people of healing who find and create these healing spaces out of which nature can renew itself, out of which human culture, human spirituality can renew itself. So the official definition, I have to read this, is that refugia are habitats that components of biodiversity retreat to, persist in, and can potentially expand from under changing environmental conditions. And so I just started to think more and more, what if we just translated that definition to cultural and spiritual spaces and had that as our kind of governing metaphor? So the book was really a kind of exploration of that what if question.
I love it. Thank you. It's a metaphor that really works. I suspect there are people in this Zoom room who would identify as Christian, and perhaps people from other faith traditions as well. In the book, you are careful to acknowledge that you are writing as a Christian, honoring diverse religious and spiritual traditions, of course, but speaking from the faith tradition that you know best. And with humility and honesty, you both celebrate and critique the Christian faith. On the one hand, you say, I've come to believe that in these times of crisis convergence, the Christian faith offers treasures both ancient and new, yet we have only begun to draw on these treasures. So I have a two-part question for you. The first is really just curiosity about that. What are these treasures, ancient and new? And what would it look like to draw upon them more fully? So hold that part.
Okay.
But you also offer a critique of the way the Christian faith has been practiced. You note that we are, as a species, as an Earth community, we are at an inflection point. And in many ways, the church has failed to respond adequately and is even complicit. You note how the myth of progress has become a sort of religion, how the church has bought into the spirit of domination and in some ways has adopted an empire mindset with a posture of triumphalism and a focus on prosperity. And so you suggest that this is a moment that demands a kind of deconstruction, a paradigm shift. And maybe God is actually drawing us into the wilderness as a kind of pilgrimage to become people of refugia. So 2 parts. What are the treasures of the Christian faith, both ancient and new? And where do you see a need for a kind of reformation?
Wow. Thank you for that. So the scriptural stories that we know and cherish continue to be treasures that, once again, both the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament, those stories continue to mean in new ways. And I think as those of us who have been comfortable and affluent find ourselves feeling this insecurity and perhaps dispossession in certain ways, we begin to see those stories anew as stories so often of people who were in crisis. And it's easy to take those stories for granted, but when you are also in crisis, you start to see that the scriptural stories are full of people in crisis, and that is where God comes to them. So to a renewed sense of that scriptural thread. And then I would say the tradition of eco-theology, which I didn't really know anything about. I've had a lot of biblical and theological training over the years, both personal and through church, but also academic. And eco-theology was just not something I encountered. So I discovered this long tradition that goes way back to the earliest, theological reflections, and now is kind of burgeoning in new ways. And so that's very exciting to me. And I consider that a treasure that is also interfaith. So there's certainly a Christian strand of that, but there are other faith strands of that too. And they're talking to each other. So that too is really exciting, that kind of interfaith theological work that's happening. And then the other treasure I would say is practices. So ritual practices and sacramental practices in the Christian faith that are grounded and embodied and remind us that faith is not just a matter of assent to propositions and a matter up in the head or above the chin or something. So those practices are part of our treasures too. And then as far as what we need in terms of Reformation, as a good Protestant, I'm not afraid of Reformation. I think it's probably time, and I think it's fair to say we're at a place in history where we're realizing it's happening. The Reformation is happening again. There's a new kind of Reformation. So from where I sit, the sort of spaces that I dwell in, I think we have over-individualized spirituality, so that faith and salvation is individual, and we have lost this sense of corporate calling, corporate redemption, whole earth redemption. And we've over-spiritualized the faith. So we have lost the sense of, for Christians, the doctrine of the incarnation, the resurrection of the body, the goodness of creation, the value of creation to God. The threads in scripture, we see God rejoicing over these works and valuing them apart from what they do for humans. So that's, I think we have, and this is, you could trace this back in the history of ideas to the Enlightenment and the rise. We could do the whole capitalist thing, and maybe we should, but it's not orthodoxy either. So it has this kind of capitulation to empire, the over-individualization and the over-spirituality. If faith is in that realm only, then all kinds of things can happen in society and in the earth that we're not paying attention to. All these injustices can happen because we're busy being faithful over here in the spiritual individual realm. So that too, I think this kind of alienation from our creatureliness and the creatures on the earth with us, the belovedness of the whole creation together, that sense of kinship, we have really lost that too in a kind of effort to be the dominant humans. And finally, I think community. And I think I say this as probably a white American Christian, but I think we have squandered the gift of community because we're so self-sufficient and autonomous, a lot of us, that we have not had to depend on each other. And so I think that's something we're going to have to relearn. And you'd think when we have congregations, we'd be able to do that, but you and I both know congregations are often not the best communities. Some are, some aren't. So I think that the practices of community living and all their difficulty are something we're going to have to relearn.
Thank you, Deborah, for highlighting both the treasures and the places where we need to see some transformation. Yeah. Turning our attention to the ways in which people of faith are engaging the climate crisis, you note that within the Christian faith and probably other traditions as well, climate action still seems like a kind of a niche concern. I love that you say it that way. When people of faith engage, they often think of it as kind of just another mission project. And we even use pleasant, comfortable language like creation care or stewardship that kind of unwittingly, I think, sometimes trivializes or sentimentalizes the urgent realities that we're facing, and that keeps human beings, separate from, outside of, over and above nature, rather than locating ourselves within nature, which is more accurate. And we tend to emphasize individual action, personal consumer virtue. That's your term. Maybe we form a green team, we switch to LED light bulbs, we double down on recycling, and if we're really serious, then maybe we install solar panels or drive an electric vehicle. Meanwhile, though, you note that scientists are saying things like, why aren't more Christians sad? Or why aren't more Christians angry or outraged? Why aren't Christians the most outraged people on the planet over the destruction that we have caused to one another and to the community of creation? So if it's not about personal nibbles of virtue, what is the real invitation or challenge here? What are you calling people of faith to do, and who are you calling us to be in this moment?
Yeah, well, I'm not the only one calling. I'm just joining my voice to a chorus here. Reverend Jim Antal, who's a UCC pastor and an activist and someone who's been really inspiring to me lately, is insistent on this idea of communal vocation. And I really love that. I came across this after I wrote the book, but he has a very strong message of the moral urgency for people of faith across faiths to address the climate crisis, and the sense that this is a communal vocation of our generation. And I love the fact that he's using that term, vocation, to talk about this. It gives a kind of urgency to it, and also a sense of getting beyond that personal virtue stuff, which is great. I think our personal virtues are important. Their practice, their faithfulness, they give us a sense of agency. All that is crucial. And that's really why the whole Refugia idea is helpful, because it suggests that the small is meaningful, and that the small can be leveraged to a larger scale through connections and kind of networking. All of that is really important. But we are facing the requirement of sweeping change. So the IPCC reports, have made it clear we really do need rapid and far-reaching transition. But all of that happens locally. So we need big policy changes. We need activism on a global scale. That's all really important, indispensable, but we kind of live it out locally. So I think the call, for me, at least this is how I've experienced this kind of awakening, I guess, is, it's just the same act locally, think globally, of course, but particularly as people of faith, to leverage our practices, our networks, our very intimate communal connections toward this big project, so that it's not just a kind of virtue competition about recycling and plastics and your diet and so on, but it becomes this project that we're working on together, and not just as fellow Christians or people in our denominations or congregations, but across faith lines and in community partnerships. And the more I think about this, the more I think about the idea that refugia in nature are resilient because of biodiversity. So a really good refugia that's actually going to work is going to have some biodiversity. That's nature's form of resilience. It's sort of the portfolio strategy, right, that natural ecosystems use for survival and resilience. And so I would hope that we think about that too, as people of faith, that the idea of working in partnerships across faith groups, across denominations, and with people in the community who may or may not have any particular faith commitments, to see it all as a kind of communal project, I think is also resonant with the faith, but we have allowed ourselves, as I said before, to become individualized or kind of in our lanes, in our silos, and that just won't do. So the Refugia idea is kind of enacting that global project in a really local, specific way.
Thank you. I just want to pick up a couple of threads there. You mentioned Jim Antal, and that book is Climate Church, Climate World. Jim serves on the program advisory committee for the BTS Center.
Oh, of course he does.
Really grateful for his leadership. And also, you noted small is meaningful, and this is a thread that we at the BTS Center have really been exploring deeply lately. So I want to invite you. This is our last question in this moment, in this section, but just to apply that concept of small is meaningful with the concept of small faith communities and refugia. You know, in several places in your book how God seems to love to work with small, humble, hidden places. And we particularly are interested in the small faith community. Most faith communities, certainly in northern New England, but probably in lots of places, are small. And in terms of scale, it's significant to note that these small faith communities exist in literally every town, city, suburb, hamlet, all the world over. And so, thinking aspirationally, we know there are many challenges that small faith communities face, but if small faith communities could claim the urgency of this moment and tap into the fullness of our calling, what might it look like for small faith communities to be refugia?
Oh, yeah, I love that question. And I think maybe some of our panelists are more on the ground really than I am, and could answer that question even better. Well, to consider the small community as a place of healing, instead of grasping so hard to recover a kind of cultural dominance or a heyday of the past. And I know so many churches are just dealing with a kind of grief at being small because they remember some time when they had a huge choir and the organ and they felt like everything was secure and the money wasn't so tight, and to kind of let go of that grief and instead leverage this idea of smallness and not try to do all the things, but just pick a couple as a congregation. Now I know then you have to agree on what those couple things are, and that might be a challenge of its own, but to say we are part of a much bigger goal here, a communal vocation of being people of healing. What needs healing right here, right around us? And that could be maybe your own property. Maybe you can renativize, like plant native plantings. People love to garden, plant native plantings, and then get yourself connected with other people who are doing that around you, not just churches, but other people. Maybe you have a refugee community and there's just no end of need. And so your church could focus on, what can we do? How can we help? What do we have? And it may not be that much. Maybe it's just you're really good at potlucks. Well, people need community and people need to be fed. So that's something you can heal. You can heal that need for feeling connection, for feeling like you belong to a place. People who have come from other places and missed those places. So whatever assets you have, figure out what the need is and think, how can we be people of healing? And it's just going to look different everywhere. And that's true in biology too, right? That's true. Refugia are always very localized. They're very particular. Those who study this in biology will ask, refugia from what, for what? So this is a refugia from temperature rise for a particular species of fish. Why? You figure out what the conditions are. So as small communities, small faith communities, maybe the questions you can ask are, what needs healing here, and what kind of refugium can we be for what or whom? And try not to do all the things like you did in yesteryear. It's okay not to, but make those network connections and allow that miracle to happen. This is how God works.
Amen. I so appreciate that response, and I'd love to have like a 45-minute conversation with you just about that one topic. But we're going to pause here for now, and we'll pick up where we left off in a bit. At this point, I want to turn it back to our musician for this evening, Pax Ressler. Pax is a performing artist, music director, composer, working at the intersections of theater and music, arts, and advocacy. They believe in the power of communal song to help articulate our shared values and stir us toward action. Pax is a passionate advocate and organizer in the non-binary and trans theater community in Philadelphia, and minister of music at Tabernacle United Church in West Philadelphia. So as Pax shares a song, I invite you to open up the chat box once again and maybe share something that you heard in this conversation so far that has resonated, that stirred or inspired or challenged you in some way, and just pop that into the chat.
Use me to do your will on earth, to do your will on earth. Use me to do your will on earth, to do your will on earth. Teach me, Lord, to do the work that you would have me do. I won't be afraid, knowing you will see me through. Guide me, Lord, to know the ways that you would have me grow. Call me and I'll go. Use me to do your will on earth, to do your will on earth. Use me to do your will on earth, to do your will on earth. Teach us, Lord, to do the work that you would have us do. I won't be afraid, knowing you will see us through. Guide us, Lord, to know the ways that you would have us grow. Call us and we'll go. Use us to do your will on earth, to do your will on earth. Use us to do your will on earth, to do your will on earth.
Thank you, Pax. And many thanks to each of you who contributed something in the chat. It's really powerful to read through. And I want to offer a special shout out to our amazing Board of Trustees at the BTS Center, several of whom are here with us this evening. It's lovely to see you and thank you for your leadership. For the next section of tonight's conversation, we want to bring in the voices of young adults, or at least youngish adults. A few of them may be more youngish, as we honor the ways in which our climate-changed world has its greatest impact on young people. All three of our guests tonight, William Morris, Jenna Van Donselar, and Ben Joshua Davis, have been engaging with Debra Rienstra's book, Refugia Faith, and listening closely to her conversation with Alan. I'm eager to hear what they have to share with us tonight. Our first respondent is William Morris. William is a climate activist located in Torrance, California. He holds a degree in environmental science with an emphasis on ecological restoration from Humboldt State University. William is a faith organizer with Green Faith, working on the People versus Fossil Fuels campaign. He also works with Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, serving as chair of their steering committee. William was one of the BTS Center's conversationalists during Convocation 2021, and it is an absolute joy to have him back with us tonight. William.
Thanks so much, Nicole, and everyone at the BTS Center. It's so great to be back with you all and sharing space with this community. And a big thank you to Debra and Alan just for that conversation and the richness of it. I was furiously taking notes of things to respond to as they were talking. So I think I'm just going to go along the lines of my notes, and I hope it doesn't feel too disjointed. But one of the first things that came up that I really just resonated with was that frustration about what is happening in the church. And man, as a young person, let me tell you how true that is. That for so long, growing up in church, being told this is how you love your neighbor and we care for each other, and these are expressions of faith, and attempting to live them out in a way that is responding to the needs of our time, to the climate crisis, and often being told that that's not appropriate. That's not what we do. This is not what Christians do, which, complete opposite of what is true, and trying to reckon with that and find these spaces outside the church that oftentimes are more accepting. And what does it look like as a young person to wrestle with that, of this faith tradition I grew up with, and having to go outside to find a holistic version of who I am in my faith. I definitely agree with, lots to celebrate and critique. I think as a young person, growing up in the Christian faith, seeing my spiritual forebears and how much harm has been caused oftentimes is really difficult, and sometimes makes me want to throw it away and say, I don't want to be associated with that. But realizing that that's not the answer, I realize that those things that happened aren't my fault, but they're also my responsibility as someone of that shared faith, moving forward to help undo some of that harm, to be a listener of the harm that has been caused, and to adapt this faith tradition, this rich faith tradition, and our beliefs and practices to this specific time of need that we have. God comes to people in crisis. That part really stood out to me as someone who lives in Southern California, the largest urban oil field in the country, by a refinery where there's neighborhood drilling. Of who are we as Christians and as people of faith listening to? Oftentimes we're very gung-ho and come in and want to do stuff, but we don't listen to the people who are most affected. We don't listen to the people who are there and what they need, the people who know best, the people who have the answers and the solutions. But because they have had their resources exploited, their communities polluted, can't respond in the ways they need to. And how are we listening to the people who God is coming to in their times of crisis? And for myself, growing up in a white evangelical church, just all the things of individual salvation and the separation of earth and spirit, and our belief versus actually acting, really hits home. And growing up in that and seeing the harm that causes firsthand, that theology is not just something that is in our heads, it's not just something that is spiritual, but it causes real harm to people. And if that is the fruit that branch is bearing, then clearly something needs to change. I really resonated with that communal vocation as well, and thinking about so many people and young people I talk with who are getting into their careers and their jobs, but it's not relating to science or climate or the environment, and wanting to do something, and having these conversations with people about career versus vocation, and that these are separate things, and you can absolutely contribute to responding to healing our sacred earth together in many different ways. And you don't have to be a scientist to do that. In fact, it's probably better if you're not. And if you're an artist or if you're a musician, things like that, we need people who can help envision this future we want to live in together. We already know what's happening, but we need help with painting the picture of what comes next. Small but meaningful really stood out as well. And these small churches and how they can reach out to youth, I think really stood out to me. These church communities who struggle with their size, and I know there's a lot of them near me as well, who have much better theology, but the size of the congregation is small. And how do we turn those into refuges for the young people who are leaving other churches, where they can live out their faith and their beliefs there in a sacred space, as we've been talking about. And that was my alarm. So that is my 5 minutes, and I will stop there.
Thank you so much, William. for sharing what spoke to you and also bringing so much of your identity to what you just shared, your experiences and the location that you are in particular. I now want to turn to our next respondent, and as I do so, invite if any of you have questions emerging that you would love to bring to this group. Debra and William and Jenna and Ben, Alan will be looking for those in the chat. So if you want to put questions into the chat, your question may get asked in the next segment. And now to Jenna. Jenna Van Donselaar is a recent graduate of Yale Divinity School, where she holds a master's degree with a concentration in religion and ecology. She has spent the last few years thinking deeply about the connections between religion and ecology, looking at the ways we narrate the history of the environmental movement and examining how this storytelling shapes our environmental ethics. She currently works as an elementary school garden coordinator and food justice educator. Jenna is someone I had the opportunity to meet through our mutual colleague and friend, Doug Clark, who is with us tonight, and in fact was very much the spark behind this entire event. Thank you, Doug, and welcome, Jenna.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here tonight. I'm struck, first of all, by kind of this theme that I'm seeing tonight of like small but meaningful. And I'm seeing a lot of like almost like my serial networks, like underground networks. William and I are friends through YECA. I've met you through Doug. Debra, I actually went to Calvin University. And so a lot of the people in your book, I was like, wow, this is my community from back when I was in college that are also your community, but we never crossed paths that I know of. But it's really amazing to think of kind of how all of these small connections that you think, oh, we just have this one conversation here, this one conversation here, and we're kind of building up this community, which in many ways brings us to our whole project, right, of our community vocation, which I love that language. I'm going to be thinking about that for the next week, and thinking about how we're really trying to find where our joy and our strengths and our talents meet the needs of the places that we are, whether that's physical location, my community here in Connecticut, or my community, my faith community, my national community. William and I are in community, even though he lives all the way in LA and I live here in Connecticut. It's wonderful to share those connections. I'm also struck a lot by sort of this idea of Refugia and how it is meeting us in this inflection point, as you talked about, Dr. Rienstra, of finding this place where we are not sure how to proceed, both with the climate crisis, with our world where we're in crisis, and in many ways with our faith communities. And as I was reading the book, I kind of was flipping between Refugia as a place of refuge in our faith of, as we're going through this period of transition of what does it mean to be Christian. I grapple with that a lot as someone who serves with an organization called Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. It's very hard to talk about what it means to be an evangelical in the year 2022. So how do we find refuge? How do we hold on to Christianity and these really beautiful, how did you phrase it? These treasures, both ancient and new, when there is a lot of pain and harm that comes with being an evangelical today and a Christian today. And as we unwrap kind of these treasures of the past, but also these deep hurts of the past as well. So there's the inflection point there. And then also with our climate crisis of reading every new IPCC report, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. How do we find refuge there too? So I think Refugia could be both within and from these 2 points of we find refuge from this heaviness of nature by often turning to our faith community, but also we find refuge from often the harms of our faith community by sometimes turning towards the book of nature, and turning towards those spaces of change and of the beauty of nature. The final thing that I would like to talk about a little bit is the idea of wilderness and liminal spaces as places where we can encounter this change, where we can encounter refuge. I was struck in the book of Debra's conversation about how the wilderness was an incredibly painful thing, but in many ways, the people of Israel needed to go through that in order for them to come out a new people. And how often we see these places of wilderness as incredibly painful, but bring us to a point of change. And where I think we're in this liminal space now where we're not sure where we're headed, where we're going, but we are able to grapple with what is meaningful, hold on to these places that bring us joy, hold on to these connections that we find between other people in our community. Yeah, so I'm really sitting with a lot of this, and also this idea of not seeking cultural dominance as we seek to be a people of refuge. I think that I was a little bit afraid when I first encountered this of, are we trying to be this like place where we hold on to Christianity so that it can bloom again once the soil is ripe for it to be the culture of dominance once again? But I love that invitation that we are seeking to heal what is right here, right now in our community, and to be a space that is okay with not being necessarily in charge, but is a place that is welcoming and going alongside this world, and invitational towards healing, creating the conditions for healing in whatever place that we may find ourselves. So with that, I will close my thoughts there. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm so glad to be in conversation with you all.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you so much for bringing your honest wrestling, your honest tensions and struggles to share with us. Your question around culture of dominance is such a good one. Thank you for sharing it with us tonight. Last but not least, we turn to Ben Joshua Davis. Ben serves on the BTS Center staff team as Director of Applied Research, where over the past 18 months, he has been shepherding the Research Collaborative, a cross-sector cohort of leaders from organizations across Northern New England and Quebec, together exploring the question, how would organizations act differently today if they embodied an ecological imagination? Ben and I co-host the BTS Center's podcast, Climate Changed, which features conversations about life, love, and leadership in a climate-changed world. I so appreciate Ben as a colleague, a thought partner, and a fellow parent in these times. Ben.
Thank you so much. And Debra, I just have to say, I feel like our podcasts are sibling podcasts that never got a chance to meet each other. We have begun doing planning for season 2, and the number of times I say, well, Debra has a great guest for that topic has been truly eerie. And so it is so wonderful to share this Zoom space with you. One thing that I just really resonate with when it comes to the idea of Refugia and the vision that is laid out is that it frames the climate crisis in a really broad way. I think you called it a paradigm shift. And I think this is really important because it doesn't pigeonhole what we're facing now in the form of a climate crisis as just, another troubling issue which nice people should do something about when they have some free time, but rather as the environment in which we live. As a friend told me recently, we don't live in an era where climate change is an urgent issue. We live in the climate change era. And I think this shift from thinking about it as an issue to thinking of this is just the conditions we're in is one that I've noted that my peers, and I'm very pleased to be tapped as a youngish adult, probably for the last time in my life as I head towards 40, that my peers and those younger than me have a much easier time making that shift, if they've ever had to make that shift at all, than many of my older friends whose formational years did not happen under the shadow of this crisis. For me, climate is not simply a matter of my profession. It's about the reality of me living on a small unbridged island out in Casco Bay that is deeply vulnerable to sea rise, where we're probably going to have to do a funeral for the most beloved beach on the island in the next couple of years because the last couple of big storms have just about wiped it out. And is perhaps even more vulnerable to the social disruptions provided by climate change. It's about my role as a father to two beautiful children, with another on the way, as I find myself really grieving the birthright that I have to give them when it comes to the ways that we have damaged the non-human communities that we are a part of. And it's about how I live out my faith as well as I can, also acknowledging that I'm doing so in the face of challenges that my Sunday school teachers never dreamed of. I really have to echo the frustration that really takes so many forms, but is really manifest well in the climate crisis that both Jenna and William articulated when it comes to the church. And I find myself dreaming of the day, I just love the term communal vocation, but dreaming of the day when our congregations will understand that responding to the climate crisis is not a question of policy or statements or programs. It is not about solar panels on roofs. It is not about recycling bins and halls, but it's a question of vocational identity. So I want to ask, what does it mean not just to address the issue of climate, but to become a climate changed church? What does it mean to understand that climate is not merely a parts per million problem, but is in fact a symptom of a much deeper set of spiritual systems? I find myself often saying this: we don't have a climate problem. We have a Western consciousness problem that is most urgently and concretely manifested in the form of a climate crisis. And if the climate crisis is a spiritual crisis at its roots, and I really do believe that it is, then there should be no group better equipped by thousands of years of wisdom and practice to offer something transformational than our faith communities are. I will confess, as someone who, after burning out in pastoral ministry, was not part of a congregation for multiple years and is only just now finding my way back in, there are times I've wanted to kind of chuck the whole thing out. And it's actually climate that has brought me back to a vision for the role that God has for the congregation, and especially the small congregation within our climate change context. I was noting the number of resources, Deborah, that you mentioned that we already have as part of our Christian tradition to offer the wider world. Our scriptural stories, our experience of what it means to be in crisis, our spiritual praxis. And I will note, especially for small congregations, and so often the discourse about small congregations is like, you're all kind of like diet church. You know, you might not have a pastor who works as many hours, your choir might not be as big, you might not have as many people in the pews on Sunday, but you can still do something that kind of tastes like church, even if it isn't as good. But in fact, what Refugia tells us is there may be no bodies of faith better equipped to answer this moment than the small congregation. And that's one of the things that I really hope any of you who are involved in small communities of faith hear from this. Everything you need, you already have. You have the tradition, you have rootedness in communities that need to learn what it means to turn towards each other rather than from each other. And you are small enough that you can make shifts quickly enough as an organization to respond to the changing moments that we're in. So deep appreciation to you, Deborah, and I hope a word of both hope and challenge for those of you who are wondering what comes next for me within the context of my own faith community.
Thank you, Ben. You probably weren't noticing, but there were a few amens coming through the chat as you were talking. Thank you so much for your reflection and your vision. So I hope this exchange has given all of you here with us tonight even more to ponder. As Pax sings, I invite you to reflect on what you've been hearing. Perhaps you want to jot a few notes in a journal. Perhaps you want to share a question in the chat. Alan will be looking for those questions as he prepares for a final conversation that brings Deborah, William, Jenna, and Ben into dialogue with one another. Pax.
Jesus said, go out into the water just a little further from the shore. Jesus said, go deeper in the water and you'll find what you're looking for. Jesus said, follow me and leave everything else behind. Lord, I will wait out from the shore. I have faith your grace will meet me there and show me what's in store. I'm not afraid, not anymore. Even though I falter, though I fail, your love will never fade. Lord, I will wait, I will wait, I will wait. Lord, I will wait. Jesus said, surrender all your fear, you don't need it anymore. Jesus said, my friends, give up your fear, leave your boats here on the shore. Jesus said, follow me and leave everything else behind. Lord, I will wait out from the shore. I have faith your grace will meet me there and show me what's in store. I'm not afraid, not anymore. Even though I falter, though I fail, your love will never fade. Lord, I will wait, I will wait, I will wait. Lord, I will wait, I will wait, I will wait. Lord, I will wait.
Pax, thank you so much for sharing your music. And thank you, William, Jenna, and Ben, for your contributions to tonight's conversation. Wow, I'm feeling really inspired and challenged and just filled. So thank you. For the next 20 minutes or so, we'll share a bit of a four-way conversation. I'll choose a few questions that have come in through the chat and pose them first to Debra, and then invite one of our panelists to respond as well. So first, Debra, I wonder if there's a thread that you want to pick up, something that you heard from William or from Jenna or from Ben that you want to respond to.
One word that you all used was frustration. And I want to acknowledge the pain and frustration, especially of young people, but not only of young people, with the sluggishness of the church. Maybe this is true in other faith communities too. I couldn't speak to it. When I wrote the book, I thought, you know what I really want to know is like, what are churches actually doing? What are church people and churches actually doing? I wish Pew Research would do a study. Well, guess what? They did. So it came out in November. And the bottom line finding was that being religious, now this is in the US, being religious in the US tends to get in the way of taking the climate crisis seriously. Now that doesn't really surprise us, right? But they've got the receipts now. And another finding that really struck me and has just kind of stuck in my craw is they had a definition of what it means to be highly religious. It had to do with church attendance and participation. And they had a different definition of what it means to be very concerned about climate change. 8% of their respondents were both highly religious and highly concerned about climate change. So that shows you how far we have to go. And I've just been thinking, what if it was 88% of highly religious people had recognized what Ben was talking about, that this is a paradigm shift. This is like not just one issue we have to deal with. This is the world we live in now, the era, the time, the vocation we have. So the fact that we're all, I think, really frustrated with that, I think it's important to just acknowledge and kind of lament that. and say to each other, I hear you. So I hear you.
And I hear you as well. I think that's really important. And yes, that Pew study was disheartening to say the least. We have 110 pastors participating in an eco-preacher cohort right now, a year-long cohort. And there's a pretty robust research aim to that as well. So we're collecting a lot of data from the pastors participating and also from the congregations that they serve. And I will say that that data is a little more hopeful, mostly from mainline Protestant congregations, probably less on the evangelical side because those pastors perhaps are less likely to participate in the eco-preacher cohort. But anyway, I hear you, and I hear the frustration that you've shared, all of you, William, Ben, and Jenna. So some really rich questions in the chat box, and we'd be here for 3 more hours if we discussed all of them fully. But I wanted to pull out 2 that seem connected to each other. And these questions, I think both are asking a little bit about what is refugia and what is it not. One person writes, small churches can be drawn back in on themselves in times of deep change and anxiety by seeking survival at all costs. And perhaps this is in its own way a kind of refugia. In that place of survival crisis, communities can sometimes lose their values and faith in order to just survive. So wondering about how the metaphor of refugia can be used to keep opening us out and calling us to instead of calling us to close in and down just to survive. So I think that's one question, and then I'm going to pair that actually with a question that is getting at the tension between this sort of hunkering down implication of refugia and claiming the power of small, so the hunkering down, with political activism, which implies risking exposure, building power, proclamation. I think these 2 questions are kind of related. Can you explore that a little bit?
There's a distinction between hunkering down and bunkering down. And when people are fearful, and that's where people are, there is a tendency to, I think, use the phrase close in on yourself. And I get that. And there's a sense of clinging even harder to the past. But in ecosystems, refugia have permeable membranes. They're not totally safe spaces. Sometimes they just don't even work. And they have to have permeable membranes, otherwise they won't grow or connect. So if we think about it that way, then yes, it's small, but not for the sake of safety. It's small for the sake of kind of prototyping, building capacity that can then connect with others or grow. So I think maybe that's the distinction, that permeable edge distinction.
Yeah. I think what you note in the book that I think is so important is that refugia are these pockets of life and safety from which life can regenerate, right? So it isn't about staying, hunkered down, bunkering down, but it's really about from which life can regenerate. So can you say a word about the role of activism in that?
The younger people I've talked to have been telling me that for them, activism is a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. And you folks, you panelists know that. That's kind of where you are too. And I wish that we could normalize that. And I think that's part of the result of this kind of individualizing and over spiritualizing of faith, that we have very limited and skewed views of citizenship and political action, the role of political action in faith. Different groups think it's okay to be political about some things and not about others. And then this group thinks, you know how that is. But to normalize that kind of partnering with other people to make things better, that seems to me a spiritual practice that we could normalize. Is just so that activism, especially around this, could just be part of our faith life together. Not all of it, but part of it.
Thank you. I wonder, Jenna, Ben, or William, if one of you wants to take that.
I will hop in. No.
Okay, go for it, William.
Wants to, okay. Responding to both those things, I think the first one about refugia and my background in restoration ecology, and this was part of the book as well, is that we're not looking to create these safe spaces that are what it was, right? We're looking to create what is future resilient for the things that we're going to have to weather together. How do we build community and build safety and build vision in that for what is coming, not what was? And those are two very distinct things. If you try to restore an ecosystem to what it was in this time of climate change, it's not going to do well because the climate is not the same as it was. And that has to do with us as humans as well. Humans are part of ecology and ecosystems. So thinking about that. And the second thing, as someone who is a faith-based climate justice organizer, I think Refugia is how I sustain myself. I think because organizing and activism is incredibly powerful and incredibly spiritual and incredibly draining, and it's really easy to burn out. And I think these places of refuge, these communities I'm a part of, the people I'm in relationship with, and the land that I get to be on, all of that together helps sustain me through that bigger organizing and political activism work, because it is so large and you're dealing with systems that are so big that having those small communities and those small places of refuge to refresh yourself are really necessary in order to continue to be able to do that work.
I just want to acknowledge what Jenna said about, I thought it was really cool, Jenna, when you said, sometimes I need nature to be like a shelter from faith, and sometimes I need faith to be a shelter from climate change. I thought that was really great. And the idea that you pointed out that for us in human culture, our refugia can be communities that are not in the same place, that we have this power of connection. And that's one of the cool things that, I think you're referring to that too, William, that your refugia is a network of connections of people that aren't necessarily in the same place.
In fact, some people have told us the BTS Center is their refugia, and that is a real compliment. When people say that, it really warms my heart. I think this leads into a question about spiritual practice and the importance of communities of practice. And in particular, I wanted to turn attention to, you explore 7 shifts or 7 transformations that people of Refugia need to make, and they're all worthy of conversation. But the one I wanted to chat about just for a moment is the shift from avoiding to lamenting. You write, Refugia Faith requires a sturdy capacity to grieve, lament, and repent. So in a climate changed world, what's so important about these 3 practices? Grieve, lament, and repent. And why is this shift so important? And just to tag on to that, one person asked in the chat specifically about coming to terms with the doctrine of discovery through lament.
Yeah, that's one thing.
Yeah, one thing.
So there are 3 different things. So grieving is acknowledging your feelings of sadness. Lamenting is more putting that grief before God and just saying why. And you're not saying, oh dear, I did something wrong. You're just saying, this is terrible. And maybe that's the right response to the doctrine of discovery and lots of other things from that resulted from that. To lament that. It's not the same as saying, oh dear, I feel so guilty about the fact that this happened in 14, whatever it was, 90 something, maybe earlier. Anyway, 1477. So that's not the same as saying, I confess that I did that, but that lament is a spiritual practice that puts that before God and says, God, you are sovereign, but this terrible thing happened. We're still dealing with the results of it. Why? How long? It's the Psalms of Lament. Confession, repentance, that is saying, I acknowledge I have to change. I did things, we did things, we are doing things, we have to change and repent. And I don't know that everybody necessarily understands the distinction between those. So sometimes you say to a group of people at church or something, we should really have like a liturgy of lament over racism. And they get all worried that somehow that means they've personally done something wrong. They're just not understanding those distinctions. And the usefulness of saying lament is the right way to feel, the right practice to do about these things that are so bad and wrong. We are teaching a kind of orthopathy when we do those practices of lament. So the orthodoxy, right belief. Orthopathy is right feeling appropriately about things. Then there's orthopraxy, that's practice. Yeah.
Thank you, really helpful. Jenna or Ben, either of you want to say another word about that?
Sure.
Go ahead, Jen.
I mean, I was thinking about kind of your earlier question and how it braided into this about how activism is in many ways a spiritual practice. And I think that that's where that orthopraxy comes in of we've lamented, we feel, we recognize that the world is not right. And so I think that that's why a lot of young people, especially when confronted with the climate crisis, are involved in activism, or with gun violence. They get involved in activism because that is how we express our lament. We put it before God, we put it before the people in power, and we say, we need to change this. This is not right. This is not how it should be. So I guess that's all that I'll add to that. But thinking about lament and then that next step of activism and calling out to the public.
Really important, Jenna. Thank you. So it seems to me we can't talk about lament without also talking about hope. And someone asked a question in the chat about that as well, the importance of remembering what it means to be people of hope. So that's my question. What does it mean to claim that we are people of hope in a climate changed world? Deborah, do you want to kick us off on that one?
I want to pass that off to Ben. How about that?
Yeah, very good.
I could go on and on, but I want to hear what Ben has to say.
Thank you, Deborah. I think hope is actually really important because this is one of the greatest resources that I believe the Christian tradition can offer this current moment, because our culture conceives of hope in terms of power. In a sense, it equates hope with optimism. So the reason we have hope is because we believe that we have the power, the political power, the technological power, the economic power to make everything turn out okay. And the problem is that when we run into a problem that can't be fixed, such as the climate crisis, where I believe we're not talking about how do we achieve victory, we're really negotiating the terms of our defeat, then we also believe that there is no ground for hope. But within the Christian tradition, hope is grounded in a lot of different terms. We can have hope because we're not alone, because we're held in the love that made us and in the company of other people across space and across time who share this work and these yearnings with us. We can have hope because the world is still defiantly, irrepressibly beautiful in a way that is not defined by any catastrophe, past, future, or present. Or a friend who asked this wonderful question, how do we love the world as it is? And we can have hope because we're grounded in the story much bigger than we are and can believe, and this actually connects back to this conversation about how to Refugia connect with these larger pieces, that we are grounded in a story much bigger than we are, whose very power we tapped into whenever we join our small story with it. I think this is actually why I just continued this image of Refugia has just stuck with me, because it reminds us as well that even an apocalypse is not the end. So we don't know that everything will turn out okay with the climate crisis. And if we look at nature, the top of volcanoes still blow off, forest fires still happen, and yet, even after apocalypse, life still persists. And for me, that's the other word of hope. We tend to think, we can't fix this, then that's the end. And it is an end. And in some ways, it may be a necessary end. But as a person who believes in death and resurrection, I believe that there's a seed within that end that is a new beginning.
That is why I had you answer that question. Yeah, I think of Refugia spaces as witnesses to that ultimate hope. So they are witnesses of this kind of grand redemptive vision that we believe in, and that they're also places where there's the crux of death and life. And that's a very Christian place to be, right? That crux, that word means cross. They are that place where death and life cross. So thank you for that, Ben. And I really appreciate your willingness to talk about just the enormity of empire and how the church, we've talked about the Church of Refugia versus the Church of Empire. Yeah. And the church as an empire and the church as a handmaiden to empire. We're not going to fix that. I think that the only thing we can do is find places where we have the Church of Refugia witnessing to this ultimate redemptive work in that. That's what we have to do.
Amen. Amen. I find in secular spaces often people use the word hope, but what they're really talking about is optimism. And optimism and hope theologically are very different things. You know, optimism is thin. It's wishful thinking. It's hoping for, you know, a positive outcome, whatever that means. Whereas hope is something that we practice. So I just feel like for people of faith, we need to know our terms and use them accurately. And that distinction feels really, really important. Your last comment, Deborah, sort of leads into another question that came in the chat. And that is a question about whether there are communities that we might learn from who are already demonstrating this kind of posture of refugia. And this person notes, you know, for example, marginalized peoples, those facing the harshest effects of climate change and environmental injustice, which usually are people who are already disadvantaged, post-colonial movements. I wonder if you have thoughts about that, communities from whom we might learn.
Well, those are good thoughts right there.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the people that have exemplified that to me, I've interviewed on the podcast. Iona community is one example. I actually saw someone mention that in the chat. There are churches that are doing this, and I kind of want to throw this over to William at this point, because you are part of this network of activist groups. And so I feel like you probably encounter a lot of other spaces where this is happening. So I wonder if maybe you have some good examples you could talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one space that comes to mind locally here is a coalition that formed a decade ago to fight against neighborhood oil drilling. They're made up of faith communities, of nonprofits, of people who work in hospitals, people who are at churches, and oil drilling is affecting all of them. And they kind of realize, hey, we are all suffering together because of this. And they decided to get together and form this community, this refuge, where they could come together, but also organize and fight back against this, saying, we don't accept the way that things are. We can't accept that our air is being poisoned. That is not the end for us. And we are going to fight back no matter how hard it is. And it took a decade, and it took a lot of political will being brought, but eventually they made it all the way to the city of Los Angeles and our city council people, who said, you know, you're right, that this is not acceptable, that certain portions of our population in LA, the most historically marginalized and disenfranchised, this is wrong. And they kept raising their voice until it was admitted by those in power. And they have decided over the next 20 years, which isn't fast enough, but still, to phase out neighborhood oil drilling in the city of Los Angeles because of this small community, because of this small group that came together, were doing the right thing, for whom this was a spiritual space of speaking truth to power, and who wouldn't negotiate their dignity. They knew they had agency to stop this. They knew they didn't deserve this. And they didn't stop until everyone else treated them that way as well. And so I think for me, like, that is a very hopeful story, but also one that is continuing, because, you know, 20 years is a long time, and people who've been poisoned forever, their whole life, don't deserve it for another 20 years. And so there's always more steps to take. But that was one of the first communities I thought of.
Thank you, William, and thank you, Deborah. Someone noted in the chat Spring Forest, which is a community that I know Ben is very familiar with. Iona has been mentioned. We need to keep collecting these stories and telling them, right? Because the stories are inspiring. we could go on and on and on, and I actually would love to, but we're about out of time for questions for now. But the good news is, as Nicole mentioned, we are moving into a season of programming around Refugia, and Nicole will share in a few moments some opportunities that are coming up if you want to explore this more deeply. I want to just end my portion by saying just deep gratitude to you, Debra, again for writing this book. Here it is, for joining us tonight, for the wisdom that you continue to share in the world, which is just incredibly inspiring to me and to us at the BTS Center. Thank you again to Pax for your music. Thank you, William, Jenna, and Ben for really enriching our conversation tonight. And now I'm going to pass it back to Nicole.
Thank you, Alan. And just adding in a special word of thanks to all of you who came together this evening to form community. May we adopt a communal vocation. Special thanks to those of you who offered questions, ideas, resources, and possible action steps in the chat. This was an incredibly engaged group of more than 80 people of faith tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, tonight's program is a launch of sorts for the BTS Center as we dive into a season of programming very much inspired by Refugia Faith. On Thursday, March 23rd, we will be hosting a one-day virtual Lenten retreat. This retreat is intended specifically for pastors and spiritual leaders, especially those who have read the book Refugia Faith. So for our clergy in the room tonight, I invite you to get a copy of Debra Rienstra's book and be part of a Lenten refugium with the BTS Center. On Friday, April 23rd, we will be hosting a day of restoration, contemplation, and celebration at Tirnanog Farm in Pownell, Maine, a woman-owned educational farmstead dedicated to restorative agriculture and the fostering of deep Celtic roots. This is part of our Wonder and Wander series, and all are welcome, although we do have a cap of 25 people, so you might want to sign up soon. Starting in April, on April 20 and running through June 15, we are offering an 8-week online course for eco-spiritual leadership and encounters with wholeness, taught by Kimberly Knight, who has a background in both digital ministry and nature therapy guiding. And finally, anytime you need a place to be with others in your grief and love for our shared home, please join us for Lament with Earth, a seasonal worship-filled gathering online featuring music and liturgy from the many. Our next event will be on Thursday, April 20th, and will focus on the element of water. Friends, it has been a pleasure to share this evening with you, and I hope to see you again soon, either online or perhaps at Tirnanog Farm. And now, Debra, I wonder if you would be willing to offer a closing blessing for this group of people gathered here before Pax leads us in a closing song.
I'd be honored, and I have a full heart tonight. I'm so grateful to have been a part of this, and so grateful for people engaging with this book that it feels like I wrote a long time ago. You know, just hoping it would mean something to people. So it's just so wonderful. I'm so grateful. My heart is full. This is a blessing from the discussion guide. In case anyone wants the discussion guide, you can email me and I'll be happy to send that to you. But each chapter has a prayer. This is the prayer from the last chapter. God of hope, you promise never to abandon us. Awaken in us divine vision and imagination. We give thanks for all those people who inspire and persist, who dream and work. Sustain us in the ordinary days. Amid weariness and fear, bring us consolation. Amid exhaustion, bring us true rest. Grant us patience and resilience to practice the discipline of hope. Awaken our attention, inflame our wonder, that we might fall in love again and again with this exquisite world for your sake and your glory. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Deborah, for this conversation and for this space of renewal. Thank you to each of you for this space that we've created tonight that inspires my imagination and I'll take with me a long time. The last song that I wanted to share and to invite you into singing, you can find the lyrics in the chat one more time, is a song that I wrote leaning on the writings of the BTS Center staff for Convocation and leaning on the wisdom of Indigenous people who understand the deep collaboration with our planet. And the idea that that Convocation was a part of was that we are the soil, that we are the thing that in the darkness can grow are the wildest imaginations of our minds. So in singing this, as you learn it, please sing along in imagining us as the soil and imagining us as a place of refuge in that spot. The soil holds the past. It shows us where we've been. The soil unfolds our history and knows where we begin. The soil nurtures life. It grows all that we need. The soil unfurls a mystery and sows a sacred seed. God, let it grow in me. Send down your rain and light, and with your help we'll be the soil to bring the world to life. To life. The soil knows what will come. It's known it all along. The soil can hear the distant hum of restoration song. The soil contains our hope. It pushes out green shoots. The soil proclaims the antidote is growing deeper roots. God, let them grow in me. Send down your rain and light, and with your help we'll be the soil to bring the world to life. God, let them grow in me. Send down your rain and light, and with your help we'll be the soil to bring the world to life. Bring us to bring us to life. Bring us to
Amen. I'd like to invite all of you to unmute, and let's just do a cacophony of thank yous and goodbyes. We'll see what Zoom does with it. We're so grateful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.